Hi, Com 322 students. This is the Exam 1 review lecture. This Prezi is going to do a couple things. It's going to give you some information about the test, and it's also going to walk you through some sample test questions so you have a better idea of what to expect. But also remember that you can be studying your quizzes and looking back at those sample quiz answers because that should make you feel really confident in the exam as well. On the exam, which opens on the 30th and runs through the 3rd at 5 o'clock and should take you about 75 minutes, and we'll time out at 75 minutes. It has 25 multiple choice questions, about 3 points each, 3 short answers worth 5 points each, and 1 essay worth 10 points each. You have 75 minutes to complete it. There's only 1 answer for each multiple choice question. Just like the quiz, do not exit or refresh your browser. Make sure you have reviewed my kind of malfunctioning test policy in the syllabus. And you are only allowed to take the exam 1 time, and unlike the quizzes, you are not allowed to backtrack. You have to answer each question as they come to you. All right, study tips. There's an extensive study guide that's been on there since the beginning, and you should be able to not only define the concept that's on the study guide, but also provide an example and identify an example. You will have like simple definitional questions, but you'll also be asked to provide examples of concepts, and I will give you examples and ask you to be able to tell me which concept that applies to. For example, oh my goodness, sorry guys. I could say, explain how the feminist perspective is concerned with men. And you would say that the feminist perspective is concerned with the gender system, which means it looks at stereotypes for both sexes, men and women, and probably people who don't fit into that simple dichotomy as well. But really, the feminist perspective says pretty clearly that when there are portrayals of men that are bad, that's also bad for women. So remember that Sarah Haskins example in that introductory Prezi about doofy husbands and the commercials that show men as kind of doofy once they get married. Feminists are interested in that because not only is that an unfair portrayal of men, but also if men are portrayed as doofy, what does that mean women are portrayed as, right? They're portrayed as the ones that are always in control. They're portrayed as the ones that are kind of domineering and like running the household and kind of the domestic experts. And those types of portrayals work together, and they are bad for both men and women. But I might also ask you to give me an example of a text that you would use the feminist perspective to study. So that could be any commercial, movie, a book, and then I would want you to explain why you would use the feminist perspective, right? So you would say, I would use the feminist perspective because this text is concerned with interrogating and changing the typical standard of gender in these ways. Or I might give you a text and ask you to analyze it in a really particular way, right? So for example, what if I said to you, I want you to analyze this text from a narrative perspective?
What can I say? I've got discriminating taste.
It's true.
I never thought that I would find the one, and I found ones in the past that I liked, but none that I really loved.
Until now?
Till now.
Do you love the taste of your beer this much?
We still on for tonight, right?
All right, so for that, remember there's a couple key vocabulary words for narrative coherence and narrative fidelity. So you might talk about how this commercial doesn't have any coherence, meaning that the characters did not act stably because you probably thought that was going to be a dating commercial, right? But then it was a beer commercial, so you would interrogate the concept coherence. But you might also say, but the commercial unfortunately has fidelity, right? So fidelity, remember, is that the value system that you see there rings true with the expectations of viewers. It might not match your value systems, but you at least understand it. And so you'd say, yeah, you know what? Because so many commercials represent men in these kind of like doofy, kind of hyper masculine, gross ways, the commercial has a lot of fidelity, probably with mainstream viewers. All right, hopefully that makes a little bit more sense to you. All right, but I might also give you multiple choice questions that involve examples. So Meredith Brooks' song Bitch is an oppositional message. All right, I think your life is probably a lot better if you know what Meredith Brooks' song is, but even if you don't need to know the song to figure this out. What you need to know is what an oppositional message is. And if you don't know, you should be looking back at the Prezi that talks about the rhetorical perspectives because you need to do more work there. Oppositional message is associated with the Marxist perspective, okay? And an oppositional message, it means that a commercial or a song or a movie is giving you the opposite of what's kind of expected. And in fact, it's taking something bad and making it kind of good. So you need to know what an oppositional message is to answer this question. So A, it takes a taken for granted meaning, that bitch is a bad word, and challenges it through irony. It takes a taken for granted meaning, bitch is a bad word, and reinforces it. It takes a taken for granted meaning, bitch is a bad word, and celebrates it, resists that bad meaning, or none of the above. And the answer here is C, that it resists it and celebrates it, because that's what an oppositional message is. All right, go and look up Meredith Brooks' song. Okay, sample test question number, I don't know what number we're on, like 5? A short answer could come at you like this, where I ask you to do 2 things. I ask you to define cultural literacy and then give an example of faking cultural literacy. And on the short answers, if you want to do a bulleted format, that's totally fine. So 1, you would say cultural literacy is the ability to participate fluently in culture. 2, an example of faking it would be any of the examples from the reading that you had from the New York Times, any example from your real life. It could be like, all my friends were talking about Harry Potter's 20th anniversary yesterday, and I was in multiple conversations where I faked that I had read Harry Potter, but I hadn't actually. All right, I might give you an example like this on a multiple choice question. Shannon disclosed that she will often fake cultural or fake knowledge about the NFL or use a snippet of information that her dad has said when talking to friends who play fantasy football. She does this even though she hates the NFL. This is an example of A, media logic, B, faking cultural literacy, C, Columbusing, or D, cultivation. The answer is B, faking cultural literacy. Columbusing would be the close second because we also talked about Columbusing in those funny videos on that Prezi about cultural literacy. But Columbusing typically has like a racial component to it where it's like white people have gone in and they say they've discovered jazz, even though people of color have been playing jazz for like decades. That's typically the meaning of Columbusing. All right, or I might just ask you to explain something like cultural cachet or cultural capital, which is from the unit on Thomas Frank. The best definition of it comes in that really funny video where that guy is talking really fast about kind of cultural cachet and how we allow our moms to wear like flannel from LL Bean and listen to the Grateful Dead, and we, think that she's kind of authentic. Cultural capital or cultural cachet is this idea that we get some sort of kind of like respect or fame or kind of credibility from partaking in social trends. And that's why we're so kind of hard on hipsters, because we don't see them as being authentic. We see them as just kind of capitalizing and appropriating trends that they think are going to get them a lot of credibility or cachet in culture. Okay, the last one, and I'm going to kind of just leave it to you. What rhetorical perspective would you use to critique this commercial and why?
Daddy, can you play Princess Passenger with me?
Sweetheart, I'd love to, but the guys, they're outside waiting for me.
Tuxedo.
What's the holdup?
Is that my wedding dress?
Could be.
All right, y'all, that's a funny commercial, and I would argue that you can use any of the rhetorical perspectives we learned about. There's definitely some rule breaking there with maybe some transcendence, so that means that you could use dramatism. I think you could use narrative because I think there's coherence and fidelity there. I think you could use feminism because there is definitely some gender expectations there, and I even think you could use Marxism, although that's a little bit harder, but I think there could be maybe some oppositional or maybe even some preferred readings. So if you cannot right now in your mind do a good reading of that commercial through one of those perspectives, you need to head back to the CellNow reading and head back to that original Prezi and take a look there. All right, you guys are going to do fabulous on the quiz, or on the test. Make sure you've reviewed your old quizzes. Make sure you've filled out that study guide. Make sure you have clearly marked all of your reading in the margins so you can easily find answers, and just know that you're going to rock it. All right, you probably won't hear from me until after the 4th of July, but if you have any questions or anything, you can always email me or you can text me during kind of normal business hours. Good luck in your final studying.